A harbinger stirs in the ancestral waters. Something ancient awakens. Before time wore its name, before sand met script, before stone crowned the sky, there was the Nile. It did not flow. It dreamed. It dreamt of empires yet unborn, of gods sculpted from breath, of secrets buried beneath silt and silence. And within this dreaming river, coiled in its essence, lived something. Beyond comprehension, the serpent. It is whispered in the darkness before dawn. It is seen in the shimmer of moonlight where no wind blows. Children of Kemet, the Black Land, were warned. The Nile gives life, but it does not give without memory. And some memories bite. They say the Nile is not a river. It is a god, a path, a mirror, a wound that never closes. And near its pulse, something stirs. In the old temples of Elephantine, near the first cataract, offerings were made, not only to Hapi, the god of the Nile's bounty, but to the unknown guardian of the waters. A presence without name, only reverence. Incense would curl into the night, prayers whispered in Coptic, Demotic, and tongue far older than either. The priests never spoke its name aloud. Some said it had none. Others said it had too many. But all agreed. When the river flooded, the serpent awoke. This was not mere mythology. This was felt. The crocodiles, sacred in their own right, would vanish. Birds would flee. Fishermen would turn inland. And the waters would carry something heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. Even the stars bowed. The constellation of Hydra, stretched across the heavens like a celestial echo of what swam below, was seen as a sign. The heavens mirrored the Nile, and the serpent ruled both. It was no ordinary being. Some believe it was Apophis, or Apep, the great chaos serpent of Egyptian lore, who sought to devour rarest solar bark in the underworld every night. Yet, others believe this Nile serpent was older still, a relic of pre-dynastic rites, a force unchained from the cyclical battles of gods. It was neither good nor evil. It was balance, disruption, the curve between opposites. There are tales etched on pottery fragments near Aswan, a depiction of a serpent surrounding a boat, eyes like suns, tail like the river delta. Other fragments show a man, faceless, offering blood to the waters, his feet submerged, his arms raised. Beneath him, coils. Above him, silence. And then, the disappearance. For centuries, the serpent slept. Its stories faded. Its symbols buried beneath newer gods and imported beliefs. The Nile became a resource, a border, a line on maps drawn by men who had forgotten how to see. But the serpent never left. In the whispers of Nubian legends, in the unspoken fears of villagers by the bank, in the inexplicable sounds carried on windless nights, it endured. Because myths, real myths, do not die. They wait. And now, under new skies and broken stars, the Nile serpent stirs again, not in form, but in remembrance. Scholars translate forgotten scrolls. Divers find carvings deeper than expected. And those who live close to the Nile say the river moves differently now. Slower, hungrier, watching. You see, this is not a story of a beast. This is not a story of Egypt. It is a story of memory, of something ancient demanding to be seen again. Imagine it, dusk on the Nile, the sky painted in gold and crimson, the wind silent, the waters black and smooth. Then, without warning, the surface distorts. Not ripples, a shape, no beginning, no end, just curve, just shadow, just truth. And in the center, an eye, open, aware, timeless. You do not run. You do not breathe. You remember. Because in that moment, you understand, you are not at the edge of a river. You are standing before eternity, and it is looking back. The serpent has returned. And so begins the myth. The legend begins in the dawn of Egypt, where the Nile was more than a river, it was a divinity. Before Egypt bore the name Egypt, it was known as Kemet, the Black Land, named not for death or darkness, but for the life-giving soil left behind by the flooding Nile. Here, civilization itself bloomed in the cradle of this sacred current. But the people of Kemet did not see the Nile as a body of water. They saw it as a body of spirit. The Nile was divine, a living artery of the gods. Its flow determined not only survival but the very rhythm of time, life, and the heavens. The calendar was built around its rise. The harvest obeyed its moods. And the myths were born in its shadows. To speak of the Nile is to speak of gods. Happy, the androgynous deity of the flood, with breasts of nurture and belly of bounty, was not merely thanked, he was adored. But Happy was not alone. Sobek, the crocodile-headed god, ruled its danger. Khnum, the ram-headed god, shaped life from the clay of its banks. Osiris, the god of resurrection, was buried in its stories. His death and dismemberment mirrored in its ebb and flow. The Nile was the breath of the gods. And where there is breath, there is voice. And where there is voice, something answers. Long before the pyramids reached into the vault of stars, elders spoke of a being that moved within the Nile. Not a god, not a man, but a presence. Ancient, formless, watching, the serpent. But to understand this serpent, we must understand the beliefs of Kemet, beliefs not written in logic, but in symbols. Everything was symbolic. Everything was dual. Life and death, light and shadow, order and chaos, Marat and Isfet. And between these polarities, the Nile flowed. Steady, sacred, eternal. It was the middle path. And the serpent was its keeper. The earliest myths describe the Nile serpent not as Apophis, that will come later, but as a guardian of transitions. In songs passed from mother to child, it was said that the serpent slithered between worlds, ferrying messages between gods, swallowing sins, whispering to the moon. At dawn, it slept. At dusk, it breathed. At flood, it sang. Archaeologists uncovering tombs in the necropolis of Abydos found serpentine symbols etched beneath the usual pantheon. These markings were not random, they were deliberate. Coils, eyes, tongues of flame, placed where the dead's feet would rest. As if to remind them, before the soul walks into the field of reeds, it must cross the coils of memory. And still, it was not feared. Revered, yes. Cautioned, yes. But not hated. The people of Kemet believed in harmony, not in eliminating chaos, but in balancing it. The serpent was not a villain. It was a necessity. Just as the Nile could flood and destroy one year, and nourish and save the next, the serpent was dual. A paradox. A protector of the unknown. A god uncarved. Temples in Thebes depict Raris solar bark traveling through the Duat, the underworld. Each night, Ra must battle Apophis to bring dawn. But there's another scroll, tucked in the shadows of Luxor's archives, describing another serpent, one not of chaos, but of remembrance. This being is unnamed. It watches the bark, but does not attack. It follows. A guardian, a judge, or perhaps the Nile serpent, in its truest form, not as a beast, but as witness. Priests would perform rituals at the banks before flood season. Offerings of honey, figs, myrrh, not for Happy, not for Khnum, but for the coiled one. These rites were not written down, only passed orally, and only to those ready to hear them, because not all truths are for the living. Even now, when archaeologists drain crypts long sealed, they find coils painted on ceilings, as if to remind the soul that even in death, the Nile waits. And so does what lives within it. To walk through Kemet is to walk alongside gods. To walk along the Nile is to walk beside eternity. And somewhere, in those waters, the serpent listens. In the shadows of the underworld, the primordial serpent rises each night to strike at the sun. Before day breaks, before the horizon warms with gold, a war unfolds, ancient, cyclical, and unseen. Every night, the sun god Ra journeys through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, aboard his solar bark. His passage ensures the return of daylight, the restoration of order, the persistence of life. But this voyage is not unchallenged. Lurking in the shadows of chaos is Apophis, Apep in the tongue of the priests. A serpent vast beyond imagining, older than the stars, longer than the Nile, and darker than oblivion. It is said that Apophis was never born. He simply was. A force that emerged when the first light dared to split the first darkness. He did not resent creation, he sought to unmake it. Not out of malice, but because chaos has no use for structure. It slithers through it, around it, and eventually, through erosion, consumes it. Each night, the gods prepare for battle. The solar bark enters the 12 gates of night. With Ra stand the gods, Set, who strikes the beast, Marat, who balances the scale of truth, and Mayhen, the protective serpent who coils around the boat. Even other serpents are summoned to defend against their ancient kin. But Apophis does not fear them, because Apophis does not die. Even when defeated, he returns. Because chaos is not destroyed, it is delayed. The myths speak of his body as thick as a mountain, his eyes burning with red hate, his breath a windless scream that curdles existence. Some depictions show his jaws wide enough to swallow Ra whole. Others, more symbolic, render him as a loop, a serpent swallowing its own tail, the Ouroboros, the eternal cycle. In certain scrolls, it is said that when Apophis opens his mouth, the stars tremble. The priests of Ra would conduct nightly rituals to ensure the serpent's defeat. These weren't symbolic plays. They were spiritual warfare. If the chant failed, the sun would not rise. And if the sun did not rise, the world would fall into Isfet, the abyss of uncreation. The people believed this. They woke with relief. They slept with fear. And they named that fear Apophis. But here is where the legend bends. Some schools believe that Apophis was the Nile Serpent, not just metaphorically, but truly. That in moments of cosmic overflow, the barrier between Duat and Nile thinned. That the serpent who fought Ra below was the same one that stirred the river above. They believed that on certain nights, when the moon was swallowed and the Nile ran especially dark, Apophis tasted the world. That he rose, briefly, coiled beneath the black waters, remembering form. And on those nights, no bird sang, and the wind refused to move, and the Nile held its breath. In one obscure temple near Kom Ombo, a hieroglyph sequence shows Raris bark riding not the underworld, but the Nile itself, with Apophis rising around it. Scholars debate this, but locals don't. To them, it's simple. The Nile is the Duat. The Duat is the Nile, and Apophis swims between. Even in modern times, the myth persists in symbols, in serpentine amulets worn against evil, in stories told under starlight about the great snake who will one day rise and win. Some say his time is coming. That one night, the chance will fail, and Ra will not rise. But tonight, he has not won, and the myth continues. From royal crowns to hidden temples, the serpent embodies both divine authority and cosmic dread. While Apophis stirred in the depths of myth, his kin, serpents of lesser wrath but no lesser power, slithered across every level of ancient Egyptian life. Unlike in modern cultures, where the serpent often bears solely a mark of fear or sin, in Kemet the image of the snake was sacred. It was presence. It was protection. It was power. The uraeus, a rearing cobra adorned with a flaring hood, was not an ornament. It was command incarnate. Placed upon the foreheads of pharaohs, etched into gold crowns and statues, the uraeus represented Wadjet, the serpent goddess of Lower Egypt. Wadjet was no passive guardian. She was the eye of Ra, the flame that struck down enemies, the fire that protected the throne. To wear the serpent was to wear divine legitimacy. The uraeus was believed to be alive, infused with energy and memory. It spat fire at those who dared oppose the rightful order. Even the gods respected it. Even chaos hesitated before it. But not all serpents wore crowns. Beneath temples, along cryptic walls, in scrolls hidden from the public, serpents also slithered in more esoteric forms. In the temples of Edfu and Dendra, inscriptions describe serpentine deities that lived below the world, neither demonic nor divine, but intermediaries of balance, guides through shadow, testers of soul. There were serpents of fire, who guarded the entrance to the afterlife, serpents of night, who swallowed memories, serpents of sand, who moved beneath deserts and answered no prayer. In one funerary papyrus, a newly dead soul must pass the 7 gates of flame, each guarded by a serpent with a name unpronounceable, not because it is hidden, but because it is not meant for mortal lips. And then there is the coiled symbol, the loop, the eternal Ouroboros. Appearing in the enigmatic book of the Netherworld, the serpent devouring its own tail was more than a curiosity. It was the visual essence of time, death, and return. The Egyptians did not see time as linear, but circular. The snake who consumes itself does not die. It renews. It witnesses. It remembers. Thus, the Nile Serpent, whether Apophis, Wadjet, or something unnamed, embodied this paradox. At once destroyer and protector, the thing feared, and the thing that stood between the world and worse. The serpent was also healer. Venom was not only poison, but cure. Some priests of Serket, the scorpion goddess, were trained to use snakebite remedies, taught to listen to how the body swelled, how breath shifted, how pain could be transmuted into vision. These practices were said to be guided by the serpent spirit. To know pain was to be touched by something sacred. Even pharaohs believed it. Ramses II reportedly carried a serpent talisman with him during military campaigns. Cleopatra, of course, famously embraced the serpent in her final act, not as defeat, but return. Legend says she chose the asp with deliberation, whispering to it in the old tongue before it sank its fangs into her flesh. Why? Because in Egypt, the serpent did not end life. It ferried it elsewhere. In rural communities today, elders still leave small bowls of milk near the Nile's edge, especially after floods. Not for cats, not for spirits, but for those who remember. Serpents seen slithering in such moments are not killed. They are nodded at, a silent recognition, because when symbols live long enough, they become something more. And in Egypt, the serpent has lived forever. Every civilization tells of a battle between light and darkness, order and chaos. In Egypt, this battle is not a myth, it is the night itself. Each evening, as the sun sinks beyond the horizon, Ra, the solar deity and eternal guardian of Maat, descends into the Duat. There, he boards his golden bark, flanked by gods and spirits, and begins a perilous journey through the underworld. But in those waters, coiled and infinite, waits Apophis, the Nile Serpent. Tonight, they will clash again. The Egyptians did not imagine this battle in abstraction. They felt it in the cool of night, in the stillness of water, in the sudden gust of wind just after sunset. These were the signs. Ra had entered the Duat, and Apophis had risen to meet him. The combat is cosmic. Gods strike with light, Apophis counters with shadow. Flames against void, order against the unformed. Ra is not alone. He is shielded by Mehen, the protective serpent god who wraps the boat in coils of sacred energy. Set, the god of chaos turned protector, stands at the prow, spear in hand, ready to strike his ancient kin. And Mara herself, the feather of truth, hovers at the heart of the ship, anchoring balance amid the storm. But Apophis does not come with noise. He comes with silence. His eyes are eclipses. His scales, a map of forgotten stars. His mouth, a vacuum through which gods vanish. He rises not from anger, but from lawlessness, from the cracks in memory, from the parts of the world left unguarded. On this night, he coils higher. The bark trembles. The underworld moans. A strike, Set pierces flesh made of smoke. Another, Mehen constricts the void. But Apophis laughs. He cannot die, because he is the breath between truths, the sentence before dawn. And for a moment, the sun pauses. Darkness stretches long, too long. Priests on earth chant. Temples echo with the sounds of bronze and flame. Even crocodiles hide. Even the Nile seems to freeze. Then, a cry, a flame, a scream that breaks nothing but fear. Ra rises. The serpent recoils, shattered again, returning to its depth, not in defeat, but in delay. Above, the eastern sky bleeds orange. The ibis calls. The wind moves. And Earth lives another day. But the battle is not over. It never is. Because in the heart of the Nile, in the coldest current, the serpent dreams still, coiled, endless, waiting. Waiting for silence. Waiting for forgetfulness. Waiting for us to believe is only a myth. But tonight, Ra has won. Across cultures and continents, the serpent slithers through myth as guardian, destroyer, god, and symbol. The Nile serpent may have found its birthplace in Egypt's sacred waters, but its soul, vast, ancient, and coiled, slithered far beyond the banks of Kemet, across deserts, forests, and oceans. Civilizations that never touched Egypt's borders still echoed its myth. The serpent, it seems, is a universal memory. In Mesopotamia, the chaos serpent appears as Tiamat, a primordial goddess of saltwater and dragons, who births monsters and wages war on the gods. Her defeat by Marduk becomes the act of creation itself, a cosmic violence from which order is born. In Hindu tradition, the Nagas, divine serpent beings, live beneath the earth in jeweled palaces, protect sacred rivers, and guard gateways between realms. They are not evil, they are balance. Much like the Egyptian serpents, they embody both danger and wisdom. And in Norse mythology, far from the heat of the Nile, slumbers Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, so massive it encircles the world. When it rises, it signals Ragnarok, the end of all things. Just as Apophis threatens to swallow the sun, Jormungandr poisons the skies. These aren't just parallel stories. They are mirrors. In South America, the feathered serpent, known as Quetzalcoatl in Aztec mythology, is a god of wind and learning, creator of humans, and a bridge between the earth and heavens. In the myths of the Hopi people, The snake clan guards the secrets of the underworld and conducts rituals to bring rain. Even in the Bible, the serpent lies coiled around beginnings, tempting Eve, guarding Eden, lifted on Moses' staff as a cure, crushed beneath heel in prophecy. Why? Why does this creature, scaled and silent, appear everywhere? Perhaps because the serpent is form without form. It sheds its skin. It lives in silence. It moves without legs. It hides, then strikes. It dies, then returns. To the ancients, this was not simply nature. It was revelation. The serpent was life renewing itself, death wrapped in rebirth, a question wrapped in fear. And at the center of this worldwide mythic web, the Nile Serpent coils. It may not be the largest, or the loudest, or the last, but it is the oldest. Because Egypt recorded what many forgot, the serpent is not just symbol. It is story. It is cycle. It is the river beneath all rivers, dark, whispering, eternal. In art, science, and imagination, the Nile Serpent still moves, silent, symbolic, and alive. The myth of the Nile Serpent did not perish with the fall of dynasties or the erosion of temples. It shifted, from sacred stone to whispered lore, from chant to curiosity, from ritual to reimagination. Like the river it inhabits, the serpent flowed onward, changing form but never purpose. Today, its presence endures, hidden in plain sight. In archaeology, fresh discoveries along the Nile Delta continue to unearth serpentine symbols. In 2022, a subterranean chamber near ancient Memphis revealed a mural depicting a coiled serpent wrapped around the sun disk, a forgotten variation of Apophis, or a local guardian god lost to time. Scholars remain divided, but locals were not surprised. The river has always had eyes, one elder said, and sometimes it blinks. In literature, the serpent slithers through novels, poems, and films. Modern retellings of Egyptian myth often highlight Apophis not as villain, but as misunderstood necessity, a force that keeps gods from stagnation. Graphic novels, fantasy epics, and even children's books now echo the duality that Kemet understood. Chaos is not evil. It is required. In science, the serpent emerges again, not as deity, but DNA. The double helix resembles the coiled form, the Ouroboros of life replicating itself. Serpent as seed. Serpent as blueprint. In pop culture, the influence is overt. Films portray serpents as ancient guardians of treasure, keys to forgotten civilizations, or gateways to other realms. From The Mummy to Stargate, echoes of the Nile Serpent flicker on screen. Stylized, yes, but always central. Even in modern spirituality, the serpent reappears. Kundalini energy, described as a serpent coiled at the base of the spine, seeks awakening, transformation. In yoga, meditation, and mysticism, the snake no longer bites. It breathes. But perhaps the serpent's most powerful modern form is memory. The Nile today runs through cities and highways. Bridges replace barks. Phones replace papyrus. But in quiet moments, dusk over the river, moonlight on the current, the myth returns. A shadow beneath the surface. A ripple without wind. A feeling that something is still there. Watching. Waiting. Remembering. Because the Nile Serpent was never just a creature. It was never just a god. It was a question. And questions endure. Beneath myth and memory, the Nile Serpent leaves us with more than fear. It leaves us with a mirror. In the end, the serpent does not vanish. It waits. It does not roar. It whispers. And in that whisper, we hear not a monster, but a question. What have we forgotten? The Nile Serpent is not just an ancient myth. It is a presence that demands reflection on power, on fear, on duality. It slithers not only through the river's depths, but through the corridors of the mind, the loops of history, the edge of dream. Because in every culture, the serpent is the same, different names, different forms, but always the same essence. It lives where we place our secrets. It sleeps where we bury our truths. And it wakes when we begin to remember. In Egypt, it swam with gods. In Babylon, it birthed creation. In India, it guarded enlightenment. In the Americas, it flew. In the Norse sagas, it swallowed the world. And here, in this moment, it returns. Not in scales, not in fang, but in story. The serpent is the shape of the unknown, not to be slain, but faced. Not to be feared, but understood. The Nile Serpent was never the villain. It was the river's question. Who are you? Now that you've remembered me. And perhaps the answer is not in words, but in reverence. So the next time you hear water moving without wind, the next time silence feels like breath, the next time your shadow moves a second too late, don't run, don't fight, listen, because beneath the myths, behind the gods, before the world was named, the serpent watched, and it still does. Comment, like, and follow Epic Legends, because some stories don't end. They unravel.